Wow, that was quite a welcome. Thank you for the warm welcome for our guest tonight. It's really wonderful that she's here with us. I want to welcome all of you to the third lecture in the Moon Lecture Series this year. We're very excited about this series, as we have been every year. So, a warm welcome. Tickets are still available for the fourth lecture in this series. The name may not be quite so well known, but she is a powerful speaker, and Rukmini Callimachi is a reporter working in the whole area of the Middle East, and particularly around issues relating to ISIS. So this is going to be very topical. You need to be here. So please plan to be here. Also, you should know that we're planning a bonus Moon Lecture this year, which is going to be in March. So the congregation is having a study of the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And what we're doing in connection with that is bringing Superintendent Terry Brown, who has been very much involved in the commemoration of the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first Africans at Fort Monroe in the city of Hampton, Virginia, in 1619. So more information will be made available as we get closer to that, but do please plan to come here and be part of that. As usual, we'll have the lecture followed by questions, and then I will ask you please to remain seated as our speaker and I leave, and we head over across the courtyard to the hall where there are goodies to eat and drink, so do please come on over and meet Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, it's really wonderful to have you here tonight. You can sense the energy in the room. Everybody's excited to see you and to hear from you. So I'm not going to talk too much, but I just wanted to say, Yamiche is a really significant human being at this point in our history. She's strategically located because she is, yes, the White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, and she has other roles that she plugs into. But she is a voice of sanity, of reason, a voice of clarity. And she will be the first to tell you that she's a reporter. She's not one of the talking heads on those news shows. She's giving you the information, and it's up to you to make your own decisions and your evaluations of that information. She's also just a fun person to be with. She laughs a lot. She's somebody who comes from a faith background, and that shows through, as far as I'm concerned, in the values that permeate all of her work. So, Yamiche, thank you for all that you do and all that you are, and we're excited to hear from you. Please come and speak to us.
Well, I am very, very excited to be here. When I walked in and all of you started clapping, I was like, is that for me? I'm like, do these people know who's speaking tonight? But I'm just incredibly proud to be here and happy to be here. And I was looking around the church, and just these affirmations, these words of Jesus are so just powerful. For people, for a person of faith, but also I think for people to remember at the core what humanity is. I also want to say this. It's really funny. There's a directions on the podium that say, "Stand in front and speak slowly, clearly, and directly." So if you watch the PBS NewsHour and you're a loyal viewer, you probably started with a Haitian girl who spoke too fast. And you were like, what did she just say? She sounded like she was smart, but I couldn't quite get it. And hopefully you've seen me mature and be like, okay, I'm sitting next to Judy. I'm gonna get this together. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here, for sharing that energy. When I walked in the room, I'm always very nervous when I have to look at the people that I'm talking to. It's much more easy to look into a camera and a black hole and know that maybe your mom's watching when you don't know if other people are watching. So I'm very excited about that. And thank you to St. Mark's United Methodist Church and Pastor Jones for inviting me here, and your lovely wife who was here, Pastor Pinkins Jones. I love that she hyphenated her name. I'm newly married at 1.5 years, and I was like, yes, I got that. As a Miami native, I'm also happy to be here because it's so sunny, and DC was so cold, and just there was like a storm happening there, both figuratively and actually being cold. So there's a lot going on. So I'm so honored to be here as part of the Bob and Dory Moon lecture series. The series is about challenging the Sacramento community to think critically and act ethically on important issues of our time. And these are certainly important issues in historical times. I want to first say that much of my journalism is fueled by my Catholic faith and by the belief in the need for social justice. In doing some research on St. Mark's, I learned that one of the central things about this church is that you have an active commitment to social justice. And that means providing hot meals to the homeless. That means providing stock and staff at a food closet for the public. And it means also helping build a school, rebuild a school in Haiti, which is where my family is from. So I feel, even though it's my first time at St. Mark's, I know that my values are very much aligned because of the work that you're doing. So I really am excited to be here with you all today. So with that in mind, I happily boarded a plane away from the biggest story to come to you tonight. Some of you, I wonder if some of you were like, is she really gonna come? And my boss was probably thinking the same thing. But I'm here, and the show went on, and it was fine. And I tweeted my life away, so I got my reporting in. And I talked to a bunch of people, which is great to be able to still keep in touch with sources in these times. But let me begin by stating the obvious, right? The state of our union is chaotic. It's at times overrun by petty political moves and increasingly about partisan politics. I'll say more on that later, but I really want to, as I talk about the state of our union, want to focus on the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, because he tells us so much about these chaotic and tough and difficult times. And to do so, I want to talk about purpose, I want to talk about truth, and I want to talk about justice. In my mind, one has to first find their purpose, do their best work to seek truth, and then press as hard as you can for justice. I've been blessed to recognize that my purpose is journalism, and that's journalism that educates people on a variety of topics, mainly race and justice, but on immigration or healthcare. And Martin Luther King put it this way: the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands, and I'll say where she stands, in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands at times of challenge and controversy. And we are truly in times of challenge and controversy. We are in the middle of an impeachment inquiry where the President of the United States stands accused of trying to get a foreign government to investigate a political rival for his own political gain. These are tough times. There are times where we all have to wonder about the definition of America, where we all have to really get real about what we want in our elected officials. These are also times where we're looking at a 2020 election that is going to definitely define, at least for the next 4 years and maybe longer, how we define America. And as Pastor Jones says, I'm an objective journalist, which means I sometimes get questions like, how terrible is Trump? And I want to tell you now, those are not the kinds of things that I can talk about. What I can talk to you about is the founding principles of our country. What I can talk to you about is the fact that I very much believe in being a journalist because I think my job is in the Constitution for a reason. And I can tell you that I feel perfectly equipped and truly blessed to be doing journalism in these times in the middle of this impeachment inquiry. And when you watch me on TV and you hear me talking to people and you hear me posing questions to people, know that I am trying my best to represent your values, the values of America, the questions that you have when you're sitting at your dinner table, the questions that you have among your neighbors. And I'm trying my best to do that in a way that represents the questions that people who are both conservative and liberal have, which I know can be tough at times. But I am someone who is really in my heart of hearts, and I think a lot of journalists are like this, that we got into journalism and are in journalism to bring truth to people, to push back on politicians if they think that we're the enemy, to remind people that the press was here and founded along with our country. And I truly feel that, and I am so excited about these times because I feel like we can now all learn about the values of America. We can now all kind of reintroduce ourselves to what America is, because I think a lot of us are learning about the Constitution, frankly. What's an emoluments clause before the last couple of years, right? Like, who knew about the rules of indicting a president? I certainly didn't. So I think that these are all things that, to me, are the reason why my reporting at PBS NewsHour is not just something that I think is important, but I think it's something that is central to my life, and I feel truly, really blessed to be part of that. So to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm often asked the question, why did I become a journalist? And it really comes down to two big things. The first is that I wanted to be at the right place when times of challenge and controversy happened. It also comes down to a Kanye West song. And this is old Kanye, just so you know, it's old Kanye. I've forsaken new Kanye. But old Kanye rapped about a young boy named Emmett Lewis Till. And as a 16-year-old in AP chemistry, as a 16-year-old in AP history class, I had no idea who Emmett Till was. I was 16. I was taking the best classes at the highest level in high school and had never heard that name. And I should tell you that I'm Haitian, so when my parents came to America in the 70s and met at Boston College, they were going through the same American history training that I was going through. So that means that there was a generation before me that went through and got their PhDs and were able to get an education in America having never heard that name. So Kanye West raps about this guy named, this murdered child named Emmett Till, and I quickly learned who he is. And I learned that bruised, beaten, and murdered, Emmett Till's body was found at the bottom of the Mississippi Bayou in 1955. He was a 14-year-old black boy from Chicago who was killed when a white woman claimed, and later recanted, that he had tried to flirt with her. Now, she recanted decades after his murder, but of course it was too late. Emmett ended up becoming a catalyst for the 20th century civil rights movement. He was one of the youngest martyrs for the fight for equality. A Google search for the first time brought me his maimed face, and I suddenly knew what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the woman snapping a photo of Emmett Till's casket. I wanted to be the reporter asking his mother why she chose to share her suffering. And I wanted to be the journalist bringing America hard truths about the ugly parts of our country. Emmett's disfigured face, the courage of his mother, and the journalist carrying his story asked me to be a professional journalist, a professional witness, and I complied. Long before I learned about Emmett Till, Martin Luther King was inspired by Emmett Till. 8 years to the date after Emmett Till's murder, some 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. At that speech, Dr. King said this: "The Negro is still not free. The life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by segregation and chains of discrimination. The Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity." Those words are unfortunately largely still true today. And they cut across not only African Americans, but other races. And segregation was the first topic of one of my stories when I started in journalism. As many reporters do, I started reporting on my hometown, Miami. My first byline came as an intern for the Westside Gazette, an African American community newspaper in South Florida. At the time, I wasn't an enterprising journalist or someone at the White House. I was a confused 17-year-old who spent the first years of my life visiting inner city homes with my mother, a social worker who would take me on Take Your Child to Work Day. And a word on my family. I come from a praying mother, a praying grandmother, aunts and uncles who blessed me with free rides in their taxis to school, with aunts who cooked lavish meals to remind me that I had a whole family that was rooting for me, and a hardworking mother who planted seeds so whole forests could likely grow. My grandfather was a notary public in a town of Haiti called Saint-Louis-du-Nord, St. Louis of the North. My grandmother was a seamstress with a big personality and a huge sense of curiosity. And on January 4th, 1974, my grandmother came to the United States. She was 62 years old, and she left everything behind because my family decided that America, with its dreams and its opportunities, that it offered the next generation a better life, and my family had to come. So my purpose at my core comes from people loving me before I even had a name. And even more, the foundation of who I am is one of immigrants who believed America when we said, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. My mother, a fiercely independent woman hungry to learn, came to America soon after my grandmother on Saturday, June 30th, 1974. She was 22 years old. Now she has 2 PhDs. 2, I know, it's a lot. I have none. And she's a living example of what we can all achieve, what we can set out to do when we're willing to be excellent and do the right things. My father, who has also earned a PhD, it's just too much. He moved back to Haiti to run a nonprofit established for disabled people. And he did that because he believes that a country needs to be held up by the people who love it. So my father still lives in Haiti, running a nonprofit for disabled people. So I watched my dad make this big decision to go back to Haiti. I watched my mom have a PhD and be a social worker for some 36 years, and you get me. I watched my mom on Take Your Child to Work Day humble herself because she sometimes looks like the editor of Vogue, 5-inch heels, makeup, the works. I get all sorts of notes after PBS NewsHour. Like, great, you said some great things, but like, that lipstick, I'm not sure. But what I found was that my mother, and following my mother around in the inner cities of Miami, she would humble herself. She would take off her jewelry. She might park her car around the corner because she knew she was coming to people's lives at some of the hardest times in their lives. And she was compassionate, she was empathetic, but she was also very clear about what she had to do. And that's why I am the way I am. So I was in high school, AP Chemistry, as I said, AP American History, and I looked around at 17 and said, why are all my classmates white if the majority of the school is African American? Why did I have to be bused from the suburbs into an urban setting to go to a magnet school? Why did some of my dearest friends who were not in those confusing AP classes watch me fill out applications to college but not fill them out themselves? And who in the world was making all of these decisions? Simple questions I've spent my entire career trying to answer. After high school, I went to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Anybody at Hoya? No? Too far out? Okay, it's fine. You should try it. I told my parents I would be a lawyer so they would stop asking me too many questions. But each summer, I kept plugging away at my dream to be a reporter. I interned at the Miami Herald twice, the Seattle Times, the Washington Post. Along the way, I talked about journalism so much that my hairdresser started telling me stories about her journalism clients. One person getting their hair done, the great Gwen Ifill. So this is very much a story about knowing your dreams, wanting your dreams, speaking them into existence, and then talking about them so much that the people around you start talking about your dreams. So Gwen Ifill, who was, along with Judy Woodruff, the first all-female co-anchors of a national news program, that Gwen Ifill was also a dear mentor to me. My first memory of Gwen is sitting under the hairdryer and her encouraging me to pursue my dreams. I was super nervous when I saw her another time during a convention for the National Association of Black Journalists. I walked to her and I said, "Hi, my name's Yamiche, but you can call me Mish." Her response, Don't let people nickname you. It's now been years since her death, and I think more and more about that advice every day. I think about her words, and I think about finding your own personal moral compass and sticking to that. Knowing who you are and why you're doing what you're doing, and making people learn to say your name right with respect. In 2009, just before I graduated, I was fielding calls from my dad from Haiti, who was dumbfounded that I was not going to law school. Now, to explain to you what calling your daughter every day from Haiti means, you're spending like $20 a day, maybe more. Calling me, saying, where's your LSAT scores? Your mom says that you put out the applications. What's going on? And I kind of just was like, yeah, that's definitely coming along. But I realized that I wanted to be a journalist. And to me, finding my purpose meant disappointing the people who had other plans for my life. It meant telling my dad, who came from Haiti with his PhD and got a PhD, that while his American dream was me going to law school, my American dream was a career that you almost simply couldn't do in Haiti. My dad and my mother could hardly have even imagined that they would birth a journalist because they didn't know any journalists in Haiti. They came from a dictatorship where there was no free press. So they couldn't even talk to me about being a journalist. So my dad got a little mad, but my mom completely supported me. And eventually, around the time I started working at the New York Times, my dad came around. So I often say I knew that I wanted to be a journalist because some of the things that make me cry also make amazing stories. In the summer of 2009, I interned at the Washington Post, and I wrote about a woman who had been going to the ER for primary health care for 20 years. After interning, I worked at Newsday in Long Island, New York, and chronicled the case of a young man who killed his best friend's girlfriend, and himself. After digging, I learned that the killer had just been released from prison and dropped into a predominantly black neighborhood in Long Island without much access to mental health care or medicine that he had been taking while in jail. He snapped, and 3 people died in part because the system failed to help him cope. In 2011, I joined the staff of USA Today and worked on a story about a young sex trafficking victim. Asia Graves looked straight ahead as she calmly told me about the night that a man paid $200 on a Boston street to have sex with her. She was lonely, and she had been kicked out of the home by her parents. And it was those stories, bringing them to people, that assured me that I was on the path that was for me. And it's in all of that, the lack of resources for inner cities, an unfair criminal justice system, people tired of suppression, that gave this country the protests of Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore. Still working for USA Today, I reported extensively on those protests. I spent months covering Ferguson, capturing the unrest in real time. Many in the country were surprised by the scenes of militarized police officers, clouds of tear gas, and massive crowds of black people demanding justice. But in fact, these issues had been boiling for a while and tipped over when Michael Brown was shot. It was the trauma that I couldn't quite understand, but I sensed early on that was really the catalyst for staying there day after day after day. As a reporter, I was shocked to be in the middle of chaos. I was inspired by reporters who had covered Emmett Till's murder and the bombing of an Alabama church that killed 4 black girls, but I never expected to actually chronicle a city in flames over police bias. But my background instantly made me aware of why these people were frustrated. These were not looters and rioters. They were descendants of enslaved people angered at their invisible chains. The DOJ later confirmed what everyone in the streets knew for a long time, that the Ferguson Police Department had been biased and unfairly targeting black people. So while the world wondered why Ferguson became a powder keg, many black people there already knew. It was that understanding that led me to Barry Perkins, who told me how it felt good to throw a rock at a line of police officers, even though he knew he would have to go to jail for it. For a moment, him and others lashing out, but also marching peacefully, felt powerful. It was a response of years of unfair treatment. Born in those scenes, of course, was the Black Lives Matter movement. And Black Lives Matter didn't mean black people should not be just killed by police unjustly. It also meant that black people deserved adequate health care, a fair shot in the criminal justice system, good paying jobs, the ability to define for themselves what equality looked like. It also meant being allowed into predominantly white schools or neighborhoods or workplaces. It meant thriving and transforming those spaces, seeing fair resources poured into spaces, and having the freedom to create wholly new spaces. And so soon, the Black Lives Matter movement became political, and so did my career. Of course, the legacy of Martin Luther King is that you get political in this country because you want to get to the root of the problem, and the tables of power deciding the fate of all our lives. It's why in 2016, I chronicled Senator Bernie Sanders' surprising rise as a leading presidential candidate, I also felt compelled to write about the large crowds flocking to him and the fact that they were overwhelmingly white and almost devoid of diversity. I wasn't picking on Bernie Sanders, but posing hard questions that any national political reporter should pose. And I was also asking, as a Black person who is always questioning how race is braided into the fabric of our society. In the midst, I wrote about Black prosecutors. I interviewed Ken Thompson, who was the first African-American district attorney of Kings County in Brooklyn. I was the last journalist to talk to him before his death in 2016. He said he was trying to make things better in Brooklyn by recruiting lawyers from all walks of life. He told me, diverse people who may not have been put on before are being given a chance to become prosecutors in Brooklyn. I'm not just talking, I'm making that happen. As we talked, Thompson listed his proudest accomplishments: his decision not to prosecute low-level marijuana arrests, even as the police continued to make arrests for them; the establishment of a juvenile court in partnership with city courts and police; a program that invited city residents to clear open arrest warrants for petty crimes without going to court. In 2 years, 8 months, we have vacated 21 wrongful convictions, he told me. 21. All of the defendants were Black or Hispanic, he added. And I'm not going to be a coward in any way from doing what I think is right. And I think that one of the biggest things that represents my determination to make a difference is my work with wrongful convictions. Jonathan Fleming spent 24 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. I chronicled his story. I followed him around and realized that he had only been given a few dollars after he was wrongfully convicted in America and thrown basically onto the street. Yes, my work is political, but to me, the best political reporters are the political reporters that are finding the Jonathan Flemings and are finding these stories to inform the questions that you ask. Despite all of this, when I later switched to then covering candidate Donald Trump, I learned even more about the importance of allowing my life experiences to shine through my writing. There was a story I did about Donald Trump coming to a Detroit Black church with a literal script, a script that told the Black pastor what questions he was supposed to ask and what answers President Trump was going to give him, then candidate Trump. There was the interview I did with a white supremacist who finally felt that his ideals were embodied in a presidential candidate. In other words, through old school reporting, it was undeniable that candidate Trump was approaching Black communities like a reality TV star, and that some racist sectors of our society were emboldened by his speeches, no matter what President Trump's intentions may have been. The lesson I took away from both Bernie Sanders and President Trump is that journalism must be the medium within which we dig for issues of race and ask questions about how to be a complex political party. We can't fall in love with one side, or at least I can't fall in love with one side. We should embrace rather than shy away from individual experiences that impact our reporting. And the great journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote in The Atlantic once, "There's a segment of Black writers who cover their own communities in hopes not in hopes of garnering recognition from their white peers, because they believe Harlem has much to say about the world as Dakar, Silicon Valley, or Tokyo." And he's right. Covering white supremacy, to me, is just as important as covering the booming economy, the Russia investigation, the impeachment inquiry, climate change, and the tornado of topics that come as being the White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour. Now, of course, I'm covering the nation's first reality TV president. Donald Trump is a president who deeply understands how the media works, and he is a president who has been clear about where he stands. The economy is booming, and he has delivered on making many of the promises he's made. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, the Iran nuclear deal. He negotiated new trade deals with Mexico and Canada. He put in place a ban on many residents of Muslim countries from coming to the United States. And President Trump ran ads on immigrants that were deemed too racist by Fox News and CNN to air. He is exactly who he ran as and has not changed. Some of his supporters have reminded me that some live in an America where economic change has also wreaked havoc. One man in Pennsylvania told me that he grew up in a Republican household but voted twice for President Obama. Then he lost hope when the factory where he worked closed and his jobs evaporated. He voted for Trump, he said, not out of malice, but because he hoped President Trump would do something to fix his town's economy. Then there were the supporters who reminded me, when I forget, that I'm doing my job in a black body. And yes, there are times where I kind of get into this Sasha Fierce, who is Beyonce's alter ego, for those not familiar, where I forget that I'm doing this in a black body. I get so caught up in the news, I get so caught up in the moment that I forget that people look back and see a woman of color, a black woman with curly hair. And I forget that people sometimes assume that I'm a Black Lives Matter mole, that I've even had some alternative agenda other than seeking truth and justice. I was talking to one man, a supporter of President Trump, and he kept repeating, well, people think I'm racist. I was asking him about health care. But he kept on saying it. People think I'm racist. People think I'm racist. So finally I asked, well, why do people think you're racist? And he said, well, black people just don't like to work. And black women, they just want to have kids without fathers. And then he said, look at you. Your parents didn't go to college. And you work for the New York Times. I rarely push back on people. But I could hear, now that you know my story, I could hear my grandmother in the back of my head being like, no, he's gonna have to get it. And I had to just stop him dead in his tracks and say, actually, sir, you're talking to someone who is less educated than my immigrant parents who came here from Haiti. I have a master's degree, they have 3 PhDs. And it made me realize that I can't shy away at all from writing about race in every single topic. Because even as I was focusing on healthcare, what this person wanted to talk about was race. And of course, it brings me to the question that was kind of heard around the world. At least the first question. I know there have been several now. But this question, funny a side story, I went to Haiti. One of my aunts sadly passed away, and I went to Haiti. And when I go to Haiti, I'm known as my mother's daughter. I walk into a room, there goes Yannick's daughter. Walk into another room, oh, that's someone's granddaughter. I walk into the room, and someone said, there's the girl that Trump called racist. And I was like floored, because I realized that this was such a defining moment in American history that I had been kind of shying away from it, because as a reporter, you don't talk about yourself, because that's just not the job. But in this instance, I realized that people were so connected to that question, and it's in some ways a very central question that I wanted to talk about it tonight. And I think about my cousins who are watching me on YouTube in Haiti, teaching me about how important the work is that I'm doing. So I said to the president, the day after it was very clear that Nancy Pelosi would be the Speaker of the House because the Democrats had taken over the House. There were a couple people still challenging Pelosi, but we kind of knew it was going to be Pelosi. So I said to the president, on the campaign trail, you called yourself a nationalist. Some people saw that as emboldening white nationalists, and some people see the Republican Party as supporting white nationalism because of your rhetoric. What do you make of that? The president called my question racist, and for weeks I've been getting the question, well, how did that make you feel? And what is it like for the president to say that to you? My response, I focused on my purpose. I was steadied by the hands of my ancestors who came to the United States so that I could pose that question. And I have news for many of you, and maybe it's news that you already know. Each of you have or will experience a moment where people challenge the very premise of your existence. I love this crowd, I just have to tell you. This Q&A is gonna be amazing. But you each have had a moment where someone tried you. That's what I would say in layman's terms. But it's where someone has questioned the premise of your existence and your pursuits. Maybe an editor told you, like one told me, that you're not confident enough to do your dream job. Maybe someone will question your career choices or who you choose to love or where you choose to live. But I say press forward. I say press forward knowing that you have every right to ask all your questions. Press forward knowing that you have the right to love who you want to love, to do the job that you want to do. And lean in on the fact that you are in this space to ask whatever questions are on your heart and whatever purpose is in your life. And of course, Dr. King had something to say about that too, because obviously he said it best, right? People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they do not know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. And that's what I did the day the president called the question that I was posing racist. I pressed forward, wanting to introduce Americans to each other, believing that if we know each other, we cannot fear each other. I focused on the fact that I have a privilege to be living and asking that question of powerful people. I pressed forward because at my core, I know that I'm an American because someone loved me enough to risk everything to come to America, to leave everything behind so that I could walk through the gates of the White House every day. I often think about my ancestors, my grandmother and my grandfather, who never lived to watch me on TV, who never lived to read a story that I wrote, but who are part of the fabric of every story that I write. So every night when you see me on PBS NewsHour now, you can remember that in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of a grandmother who was a seamstress, a grandfather who was a notary in a small town in Haiti, a mother who at 22 years old came here and gave it all that she had to have me. And one more note, I'm gonna share that with my mother, by the way. Someone said, thank God. She would like that. And one more note about Dr. King's legacy. I not only have to thank him for the rights that I have as a Black woman, as an American, I also have to thank him for my husband. He's not here tonight, but I'll give him a shout out anyways. We met in 2012, right in front of the MLK Monument, during a meetup at the National Association of Black Journalists. It's a funny thing now to drive past that monument and remember that King's legacy is not only of perseverance, but of a sincere personal love, a love that has meant me building a family, a love that's meant me explaining America to itself, a love that's allowed me to press forward in the deepest and hardest times. So now, as I think about covering the impeachment inquiry, where I'll get back on a plane and jump back into Washington, D.C., as I think about the 2020 election, I think that we will all move forward, I will move forward in understanding, in love, and focused on justice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
For some questions? All right. There's
All
an
these
urgent
hands.
one right here, I can see.
Okay, remember, I got to stand in front and speak slowly and clearly and directly into the microphone.
I'll stand here and speak slowly. I don't really have a question, Yamiche. I just wanted to congratulate you on the very well-deserved receipt of the Gwen Ifill Award.
Thank you.
And it's so rewarding to know she was a mentor.
Thank you. You should know every night at the NewsHour, we're constantly thinking, what would Gwen have done? How would she have covered this story? One of the saddest things I think about is the fact that Gwen, who is getting a U.S. postage stamp, by the way, that she's not here to cover this story. And Gwen loved covering politics, so I know she would have loved to cover all this stuff. So it really means something that I got that award from her university. I really appreciate that.
Well, I have a statement and a question. The statement is just appreciation for the NewsHour. I think the NewsHour is such an incredibly important institution, the best and really the only, I think, national news program of its type. And so what you guys do, the professionalism, the quality, the commitment is just so important to all of us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. My question is, I'm really fascinated about what the life of the White House correspondent is like. I mean, in these times, I mean, do you get any rest? You know, what's a typical day, and how do you keep yourself from being just consumed by, you know, the stress and the negativity that is your job or a portion of it?
Well, it's funny because I was driving around with Pastor Jones today, and I was telling him about kind of my schedule for the last week. And he said, wow, like that's a lot. And I said, well, yeah, well, if you take out sleep, it's not that hard. And that's really, I mean, that's kind of it. I am not sleeping. And I have this Apple Watch that buzzes every time President Trump tweets, which is not healthy. It's just not. But I'm kind of just like invested. I'm invested right now. I'm invested. And I think it's because I really feel like I'm going to really look back at this time and think, I cannot believe I got to cover that. So I think that I can sleep in like 3 years or 2 years or something. And in terms of negativity, I really focus on the privilege of it. I really focus on the background and the fact that my ancestors would just be blown away that I was asking a question to the President of the United States. I really focus on that a lot because I think that the job is hard. I wake up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. I go to bed at like 11. It's a lot. And for me, who wants to also cover kind of on the ground issues and real people, that's a big balance to ask, because what I love about the NewsHour is that even though I'm the White House correspondent, which means that obviously I'm at the White House every day, I can go out and kind of do other stories. So just this week, I'll give you an example, because this is a great story that's coming up. I had my birthday on Friday, like partied like a millennial, got on a flight, went to Mexico. It did these incredible interviews for 3 days about people who are a part of the Remain in Mexico policy that President Trump started, which is that if you're fleeing violence in Honduras or Central America, if you go through Mexico, which pretty much everyone does, which you have to, and make it to America, instead of seeking asylum in America and waiting out your case, you're getting sent back to Mexico, and then you have to come back every time you want to have a new hearing. So you're talking about 6 or 7 times of you traveling to and from Mexico if you're a poor family that came from El Salvador and have nothing. So I did that. That story's in the works, and it's going to be an incredible story. I'm really excited about it. But it meant that on Monday, if you watch the show, I was doing it from San Diego while Nick and Lisa were on set. Then Tuesday, I was back at the White House in DC. So I was in DC Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I was in New York. Friday, I'm here. And then I'm going back to DC tomorrow. And then I'm probably not going to be allowed to ever leave DC until after this impeachment hearing. because people were like, where are you going? What are you doing today? And I'm like, it's fine. They love NewsHour. I'll be back. So, I think that it really is just like willing yourself to go. But I also think that that's why I think being in your purpose is so important, because when I graduated in 2009, that was when Lehman Brothers collapsed, and it was when no one had jobs. And I decided that if I was going to be laid off and I was going to be fired from a job, that it should be my first choice, because I would have been inconsolable if I was a lawyer and got laid off, because I would have been like, well, was my third choice, right? So to me, being able to like be in the job that is for me has helped me kind of muscle through this, because I think that if you don't want to cover this story and you don't like working long hours and you don't want to be a journalist, you cannot survive covering the Trump administration. Like, it's just like, it's too much.
Okay. I'm curious, when you talk about some of the questions you've raised in your consciousness as an African American, has it influenced other reporters, do you think? Do you see any raised consciousness about the kind of topics they're willing to go for? Thank you.
Yeah, I think something that has definitely been clear, especially in the last couple of years, have been that, yeah, my white colleagues have absolutely at the White House been asking questions about race, much like another question that went viral for me when I asked at the G7 about Russia and why the president kept repeating this misleading statement about Obama being outsmarted by the president of Russia, and that's why Russia was kicked out of what used to be the G8. So I think that it's one of those things where you kind of have to really be nimble. Like, I do like asking questions about race, but I also have news of day questions. And much like race, of course, sometimes is bubbling up as the news of day. So like when the president was tweeting about the 4 congressmen telling them to go home, or the late Elijah Cummings and his district saying that it's infested, there were a lot of reporters who were asking blatantly, like, hey, people think that this is racist. What do you have to say about that? So I think we've definitely seen a raising in consciousness, especially after Ferguson and the death of Trayvon Martin and all these different things that aren't just like big race stories, they were big American stories. So I think that has really shifted the ability to tell these stories. And the White House is more diverse now than it was in the past. I mean, when Judy Woodruff was doing the job, there were almost very few women there. I'm doing the job, and there are a good group of women there, and a couple women of color with like April Ryan and Abby Phillip at CNN, and Aisha Resco at NPR. But the media is still definitely trying to get more diverse, but there's definitely a ways to go on that front.
I have a question. You're a very well-known news reporter. In your world, being a black news reporter, do you meet a lot of prejudice still? I mean, we're totally unaware of what you meet being a reporter and being black, but are you meeting a lot of prejudice?
I would say most people of color are, right? I think, yeah, I would say most people of color. I would also say, as a woman, you probably are bumping into misogyny every day, right? Like, my friends are starting to have kids, and I'm just starting to learn like motherhood and the things that happen, and the fact that like literally my friend was filling out like her maternity paperwork, and I was like, why does that say disability? That's weird. Why would you be filling out like FMLA? That's you're having a baby. And she was like, oh, well, this is the paperwork. So I think that like as I get older, I learn how much more being a woman is going to impact my life. I've always, in some ways, because race has been at the forefront of my life, more than being a woman, but mainly because I haven't had a child. They're just things that I haven't gone through in the same way that I have with race. But I think all of those things are there. I also think that you're out in California and you're in Sacramento. If you go to different newsrooms, you'll be surprised to find how many people are from LA or from from DC or from, I feel like there's like geographical issues in terms of like how many people are veterans who work for news organizations, how many people were carpenters before they became editors. I think that newsrooms still need to have a whole range of experiences, not just race, because it's too easy to just be like, okay, well, we all graduated from great schools and got great jobs and now we're all here. Some of the smartest editors I've had have been people that had whole careers outside of being journalists and who then came to journalism later.
So I have a quick question. The NewsHour is one of the only news shows, non-comic shows, that allows more than 3 minutes for a story. And you explore topics that aren't covered on most of the major stations. What is it about the NewsHour that allows to do that? And how do we push that for the mainstream media, ABC, NBC, all those major news stations? And a quick follow-up, do you have any good Rudy Giuliani butt dial stories?
I have no Rudy Giuliani butt dial stories. Rudy Giuliani has texted me emojis before, like movie emojis once. But anyways, he's an interesting character. And then your question was NewsHour. So I think NewsHour, we're allowed to have more time and tell different stories because we have a team of people that really care about those stories and think that that's the way we should run our show. It's an hour of TV. Now we have NewsHour West, so we have maybe an extra hour in the West as well. But the West show mirrors a lot of what the East show does. But I think it really is just like a conscious decision, and also they're hiring people who want to tell stories in a deeper way. So the other White House correspondents might not be like, I'm going to take my weekend on my birthday to go busing through Mexico and kind of and doing that story. What I want to do is maybe go to the spa, which I'm not going to lie, I thought about, right? But I think that I work at a place that says, yeah, you know what? Like, we know you're sitting in the basement. We know there are mice. Let's just let Yamiche go tell the story. So I feel like very privileged to be able to do that. And I think that I like NewsHour because when I watch NewsHour, I learn things all the time. If I watch the show, the best days are when I can watch the show completely, because then I can read about country music, or learn about country music. I can learn about the Kentucky governor's race, and I can learn about Flint and the fact that there's still no water there. I could do an education story. Miles can remind me that space is still out there. Like I think there are just so many different things that you learn that I think are important. And I think that, but I also think that I obviously also work for NBC News and MSNBC. So I also have to say that I like being these hour-long panels where people discuss what's going on, because I think people really do want to know, like, what's going on in DC and and I think that a lot of the times when you see like hour-long shows about impeachment, I'm sitting on set with a prosecutor who's telling me about what the Clinton impeachment was like. I'm sitting next to someone who's explaining to me how the NSC works. So I think that at its best, the news can be kind of a whole variety of things, and you choose what you want to really watch. So I think you should watching the NewsHour and CNN and MSNBC, and I would say Fox News, because it is the largest network in the country. More people watch on some hours, more people watch Fox News than MSNBC and CNN combined. Right? So, you talk about Fox News, it's not some fringe thing out there. It's where most people are watching cable news. So I think that all of that needs to be accounted for, because I watch Fox News, especially if it's the primetime shows, to figure out what the president's thinking sometimes. I mean, we saw the transcripts that came out this week. They had to call Sean Hannity. State Department officials called Sean Hannity to say, hey, could you kind of get the president to lay off the ambassador or the top diplomat in Ukraine? That's pretty incredible. So I think that, I think a variety of news, including international news, because my mom watches a lot of international news. And one of the things that I think American journalists kind of have a bias about is that we kind of all believe that America is the best place in the world because we all live here, right? Like, you're consciously living in America and not moving, despite whatever you think about the last couple of years. You're still here. So obviously you made the conscious decision that this is the best place in the world, or at least the best place for you right now. And as a result, you'll get an American perspective on all news, even when you watch across networks. So when you watch how the Brits cover us, or the French cover us, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're talking about us. It's like, so it's like the Americans are like, it's like, oh, okay. So I feel like you have to do all that. I feel like you really are missing the story if you don't watch BBC and see how they cover us.
Yeah, hi, Yamiche. I've enjoyed watching you on, MSNBC and also PBS, of course. My question is not really a question, it's more of an evolution of my own mind, and then you can comment on it if you'd like. I'm a political junkie, I'm a news junkie. That's my little cross to bear, but anyhow. The president has encouraged everybody to read the transcript of his perfect phone call, and of course I had to read it too, and it sounded to me like he was extorting the president of Ukraine. So then I did some research on what is extortion. I'm not a lawyer, and I came up with a very interesting word, bribery. And the word bribery is actually in our Constitution as one of the things that is impeachable. And so I'm just curious, I started watching the news more and more to see if news people would talk and use the word bribery, and so far Ari Melber is the only person that I've heard use that word. And I'm just wondering, what goes on in news organizations? Why do they continue to use this Latin word quid pro quo when the word bribery is so much more understandable to people? And I would really encourage you to talk to your fellow newscasters as someone who is very interested in persuading, since our president is such an excellent marketer, to use language that is understandable to people for the crimes that he's committed or appears to have committed.
I think that's feedback that we should hear, frankly. Because in DC, it's like, oh, quid pro quo, like lawyers start talking. And I was thinking about one of the transcripts that came out, and someone asked one of the witnesses, I can't remember who, like, what do you make of a quid pro quo? I think it might have been Taylor. And Taylor being the current top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, and he said, well, I don't speak Latin. So, your point is well taken. Your point's well taken.
Yes. Hello. I'm an old journalism major, and I have to say that you guys on the press corps are my heroes.
Thank
and
you.
I am just wondering, it's obvious when we watch the news how differently the press corps is being treated now from how it used to be. You're being called the enemy of the people. And I'm wondering, how are you all handling it? Are you encouraging one another? Where are you drawing your strength to get through this and to stay strong and do your job?
Yeah, I think that, yes, it's high profile that the president's called us the enemy of the people, but I think I lean back on the fact that how do you get through your day, right? How are we all getting through all of these days? It's by leaning on people that you love. It's by talking it out. It's by screaming a little bit. It's by doing all the things that you need to do, working out, eating, all the things that you need to do, maybe in that order, which is what I do sometimes. I think that that's what you do. I think specifically, I really do focus on the fact that I came from people who were fleeing a dictator and could not have had a free press if they stayed in Haiti. And as a result, when someone's like, oh, you're the enemy of the people, you're terrible, it kind of rolls off my back because I'm like, okay, anyways, my question is. And I ended my remarks by talking about my husband, because if it's your husband or your best friend or your mom or your neighbor, I think we all need a little bit of self-care and a little bit of ease. And my husband, even though I definitely gave him the runaround for like 7 years, I now have come to the conclusion that he is probably one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And I think that way because when I get home, I've never like had a second part of my day with a partner. in this way. And it's just a second part of your day. I can't even imagine, I don't have children yet. I can't even imagine what being a mom is gonna be like, because it's like it requires, like I'm watching my friends who are moms, and it requires you to kind of be like, oh, I'm sorry, whatever this manager or whoever said to me, I have my kids hungry, I gotta go do that. Or my kid's smiling, that makes me happy. So I think that it's just finding ways and people that allow you to kind of check out. So I've taken up swimming. I spend my weekends most of the time, if I'm not having to work, because the NewsHour is Monday through Friday, thank God, that I just spend the time kind of enjoying being a newlywed and walking around DC and going to museums and really just trying to, like, at times turn it off. Now, I will say that I am not that good at turning it off. I'm always checking my phone, as my husband will tell you, constantly looking at my arms, seeing what's going on. But I also, when I'm swimming, I can't, well, actually, I do wear my watch in the pool. Okay, I do wear my watch in the pool. But, but I can't actually check my watch while I'm swimming. So it's a little bit of, but I tell people that I'm friends with, including my mother, like, turn off the TV sometimes. Like, go, and obviously I'm a TV journalist. I want you to watch me. I want you to watch me on MSNBC and other places, but also, like, turn off the TV sometimes. Because sometimes it's a little much. And take a beat. These are things that are so personal. I have friends who have had abortions. I have friends who have been sexually assaulted. Take a beat if you need a beat, because some of this stuff is really, really personal. I've had family members call me crying after the president said that Haiti was an S-hole country. I've had some really, really kind of deep conversations with people about how triggering a lot of this stuff can be that we're talking about in the media, immigration and people's families. So I really feel like we all need to, if you have to, take a break from all of this stuff. And my mom just retired after 36 years, and it's so funny to watch her kind of go into this next phase in her life where, like, I call her and she's like, oh, I'm at Silver Sneakers. And I'm like, what's Silver Sneakers? Apparently you guys know what Silver my mom's like sitting in the sauna, or like she's yelling at the TV because one of the View co-hosts said something she doesn't like. And I'm like, who are you? But it's great. Retirement is apparently great. So it's going well for her. So I feel like my mom is starting to practice the self-care that she really didn't do when she was working. So I'm trying to figure out how to live a little bit of my mom's life.
Oh, thanks for an inspiring evening. I have a question, but just a shameless plug for a book called A Wreath for Emmett Till by a woman named Marilyn Nelson, who is professor emeritus at UConn. She was the 1965 yearbook editor here in Sacramento at Hiram Johnson High School. She's got a whole series of books. It's great stuff.
I love that high school got more cheers than Georgetown.
Well,
you people are,
anyway.
This is a tough crowd.
So you kind of answered my question about the angst and the cognitive dissonance I'm feeling, but since we're in a house of worship, Trump's pastor has gotten quite a bit of attention the last few days. And perhaps you, within the bounds of professional journalism, have something to say about faith and the faith dynamics and that whole situation that's evolving, and how faith has affected Supreme Court appointments, for example, and things like that. Thank you.
I will say two things. The first is that it's sometimes controversial when I tell people that the president has kept the promises he made, but he has in a lot of ways. These judicial nominees are going to change the courts for generations. And he's had like 170 young, mostly white males get on the benches. They're going to change the laws in America. They're going to change the understanding of America, of the judicial system in the image of Mike Pence and President Trump. That's just going to be the case. And two Supreme Court justices is important. Two Supreme Court justices that people had to stomach through. I know I talked to a lot of people after the Access Hollywood tape who were kind of really not wanting to support President Trump, but who still believe they could not support a Democrat because they wanted those Supreme Court justices, and they got them. But then I would also say, the second thing I would say is that I'm always very, very specific when I talk about faith. I say white evangelical voters, I say white suburban voters, I say white women or black women, because it's a lot of times people talk about evangelicals backing Republicans, and it's like, well, black evangelicals do not back most Republicans. And we have to, again, split that up. And it's not to say that one is wrong and one is right, but it's to say that we have to be super, super specific so that when we're talking about these things, we're not taking out the big thing, which is that black people and white people are voting differently even when they're sitting in the same churches, which even then we know often are not sitting in the same churches. So I think that this is just a moment where if you were someone who is the faith background or have the ideals of Mike Pence, then you feel really, really good about the judicial system and the direction of the country, even if you think that President Trump is brash and unethical. There are people who absolutely support this president and will vote for him again based off of that.
Diane, did you have a question?
So I have a question. With what the internet has kind of done to journalism and local newspapers having to lay off reporters, what are your thoughts about how to keep the press available and alive and around?
I would say subscribe to your local papers. Like, support your local PBS stations, support the NewsHour, and talk about what you're reading to your neighbors and your friends so that they know that paying for journalism is needed. I subscribe to the Miami Herald, the Washington Post, the New York Times. I'm sure I could rustle those out of someone's hands if I wanted to read them for free, but I don't want to read them for free because I know my friends aren't producing them for free. I know that the NewsHour couldn't just send me to Mexico to interview a woman who's been raped or kidnapped because without the support of viewers. So I think I'm very particular about making sure that I talk to people and really spread the word that journalism is so important, but it also has to be supported. It's not just something that's going to support itself. And I get really sad when I think about local news and then local news newsrooms, because I was a child of local newsrooms. I learned how to be a reporter first by writing briefs in the Miami Herald and learning how to cover my hometown and working at a weekly paper and then moving up and doing other papers. But to me, it's like those fundamental skills have stayed with me. And if you don't have the avenues for those, then it's like, who's getting the good jobs? It's going to be people with connections. It's going to be people who have the money to be able to take an unpaid internship. It's going to be tougher. And I think I can't say it enough to really, really support journalism.
Yamiche, we watch you every night, and it's so wonderful to have you here. So thank you for all that you did tonight. So, Yamiche, what's going to happen between now and Christmas in Congress? With the impeachment, I mean.
First of all, I feel a little weird answering this question without Lisa standing next to me. Right? So we're going to have to pretend that Lisa's right here. Because when questions like that get asked at a morning meeting, I'm like, well, Lisa, how is this going to work? Because I'm all about calling the lawyers and knowing the documents and knowing what people are saying and breaking some stories. But in terms of the functions of Congress, that Lisa is really good at that. And she's good at a lot of this stuff and a lot of things. But essentially what's going to happen is that there's going to be public hearings for the next couple weeks. And then we think there's going to be a vote in mid to late December. So Congress is supposed to be I think, starting December 12th. I did this because I literally emailed Lisa, are we getting a break? Are we getting a Christmas break? I need to know. And Lisa basically was like, I don't think so. But so there's supposed to be a vote sometime in mid-December. Then Congress will likely go for a break for a week or two. And then in January, if the president is impeached, which is likely that he will be impeached from the sources that I'm talking to in the Democratic Party, we will then move to a trial in the Senate. We will all get to see John Roberts do some stuff that we've never seen him do before. And then Mitch McConnell says already that the president will be acquitted. So Mitch McConnell has said that very clearly, that he thinks the president will be acquitted. So if that happens, then we're talking about acquitted in January and Iowa caucuses start, and then we're off to the races. The election? The impeachment? I mean, yeah, so I think he's going to be impeached in about December, and I think he's going to be acquitted in January. And I think he will not be removed from office. Things could change. He could go back and do some stuff in Syria, make the Republicans angry again. But I think what this comes down to is Republicans believe, at least they tell me, that they don't think the president did something that was impeachable. They think that maybe it was wrong or problematic. Some senators have said that on the record, that they think that it was wrong but not impeachable. I have a whole running list of Republican talking points of how it's evolved and how we've gotten to this point. But basically they started with this whistleblower has secondhand knowledge, and they basically ended with two things. Lindsey Graham said that the president's Ukraine policy was too incoherent and they're incapable of doing a quid pro quo or bribing another country. And the second is that Senator Pat Toomey, I want to say, says that he just thinks it's problematic but not impeachable. So we're going to see a range of things probably said by the Republicans, but it's pretty clear that he's going to be acquitted. And then it becomes a question of how's that going to affect the 2020 election, because basically Democrats will have spent 2 to 3 months doing a process that likely would not have worked out, and I don't know what that means for whether or not his voters are going to be more excited or less excited, whether or not, I mean, there's obviously a calculation that these public hearings are going to change something, but I also think that Mitch McConnell is pretty clear, and I think Mitch McConnell, like him or not like him, he has a pretty good sense of what his caucus is going to do.
How has the lack of White House press briefings affected your job as a White House correspondent?
Wait, where are you? Oh, here. How's the lack? Oh, briefings. They used to be so great. So, I mean, lack of briefings, it's changed the fact that we can't ask follow-up questions, which means you can't, as the American people, ask follow-up questions of the President of the United States or of White House officials in most public settings on TV. I put that caveat in because I do talk to White House officials every day. They do get back to me. It's not like they're stonewalling reporters. They're just not coming to the cameras in the traditional way. The president walks out on the lawn like he did today, talks for long periods of time, So we do get access to the president, and most White House reporters who covered Obama, I didn't cover President Obama, most White House reporters will tell you we get way more access to President Obama than we get way more access to President Trump than we ever did to President Obama. President Obama rarely, if ever, took questions walking out on the lawn. He went to the briefing room and did did briefings there, but he never, or almost never, took questions on the lawn. So what we have is the president being able to ask a lot of questions, but if you were trying to ask me a question and I was like, yeah, I'll take your question, but I put like a military chopper behind me and added cold weather and rain, you would be like, well, Yamiche really isn't answering our questions because like there's an impediment there. So the problem with the way that things are working now is that if Fox News or ABC puts a question to the president and he doesn't answer it in a straight way, I hardly can hear what the question was, let alone the answer. So there's no way to really follow up what another person's saying. There's no like coherent kind of questioning of the president. The other thing to note is that if the president hears your question and he doesn't like it, he could just like walk past you. So if I say, James Comey, he's like, I'm good. If I say, Mueller said you weren't truthful, he may or may not answer my question. Like last time he did answer that question, we got into like a little bit of a back and forth. The other thing to note is that when we got into, I was asking him about Robert Mueller testified that White House officials and campaign officials were not truthful to him. So I was putting that question to the president, and we kind of got into a back and forth where he was like, that's not what he said. And I was like, yes, he did. Like, this is what he said. And it sounded like I was yelling at the president. And I could understand why someone would be like, oh, well, she's being disrespectful. But I was literally yelling over a chopper. I was like trying to get him to like hear what I was saying, but it looked so antagonistic. So when you watch it on TV, it's like, oh, these people are so crazy because they're yelling at the president of the United States. So I think there's like the optics of it. And he can just dodge questions. If he just doesn't like them, he can just dodge them. So that's tough.
Hi, Yamiche.
Hey.
In this age of attack on the media and journalism from president and also for a lot of Fox News affiliates and Rush Limbaugh, and it's just a whole slew of them out
You've
there.
like summarized the last 3
Yeah.
years.
So, isn't there some part of the federal government, or is there someone that can hold them accountable to the truth? It seems that, they're trying to hold Twitter accountable and Facebook accountable, but Fox News seems to be able to just do whatever they want, make up any lies, and sell it as the truth. So I'm just wondering, what is accountability as far as news is concerned, broadcasting from our federal government standpoint?
Well, there's two. I mean, I don't think that the federal government's ever going to be policing the content of news. And I'm not quite sure we would want a country where the president or the federal government is deciding, hey, I don't like that. I think that what that journalist said isn't truthful, so I can take that person's show down or that network down. I think that's a really slippery slope. So to me, I say it's good to have options, and then you can decide what you want to watch. So Fox News is doing great because, as I said before, the number of people that watch Fox News are at times and in certain hours are what CNN and MSNBC have combined. So if you watch Fox News and say, oh, well, they're not being truthful and that sounds like a conspiracy theory, the demand is that more people want to hear that than PBS NewsHour. That just is the truth.
Hey, Kamisha, I'm going to ask you a question. Over dinner, we started a conversation about a crystal ball conversation. If a Democrat is elected and we go back to the old way of doing White House and doing press accountability, won't it be sort of boring? After all of this circus, how is it going to change? And are we going to lose interest? Are people going to be, haven't we all got really fascinated by this show? And are we just going to go back to our boring old lives in the future? I know it's a terrible question.
I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, if you told me in 4 years I'm covering a president who doesn't want to speak to me on the lawn anymore, who only maybe comes to the press briefings 3 times a year, I'm like kind of frustrated, and I'm like, what is this? So I think it's hard to say what we go back to and what that will look like. I also think it's kind of the natural progression that as technology changes and phones change and the world changes, that the presidency is going to continue to change. So I think that, yes, President Trump is the one who's now become this kind of Twitter in chief, but I kind of feel like someone would have harnessed this differently, because I don't know if we're going to ever go back to the days where like -BO means that President Obama physically typed out a tweet that probably his aides still read over, right? I don't know if we get back to those days and what those days are really like. I think it's going to be really interesting to see who gets elected next. So it's whether or not President Trump gets re-elected and he continues to do kind of social media, or if it's in 4 years. Because I think, let's say Mike Pence wins, I don't think Mike Pence is going to be tweeting like this. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. But the question is, like, if Elizabeth Warren wins, what does she do to keep people interested? I don't know. I think it's a tough question, but I think that after a while, people got on autopilot with President Obama. Like, people checked in, but like no one was really watching the news in the same amount of way. Everyone was excited about 2008, or at least some people were excited about 2008. Some people were super angry about 2008 and watching a lot of Fox News. But I think it's tough to see a presidency where we're not constantly knowing what the president thinks.
This will be our last question.
Hello and welcome to Sacramento. I am wondering if you have any idea of how we are going to learn what really happened during this administration, because there doesn't seem to be anyone taking the kind of notes that will help us understand the history, the true history of this administration. There are no more White House logs that you sign in when you go to visit. What's the history of this government going to be when he leaves?
I think it's going to be that Trump administration officials, career officials, are going to be telling people what happened during these years. I think that this week we found in like some 2,000 pages worth of transcripts that there are people working for the federal government who are willing to, as they work in the White House still, are willing to go to Congress to say, look, this is what I saw, this is what I said, this is what I saw, this is what I said, this is what concerned me, this is why I think it's wrong. Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman is literally still working at the White House while defying the White House's stance and going up to the Hill. His lawyer has told me that he's willing. His lawyer has told me that he's willing to testify publicly. His lawyer has also told me that his lawyer is basically feeling like his client is willing to, I think, just be a witness. So I think that that's kind of what's interesting about what's going on here. I feel like there are just people that are willing to stand up and talk about things that are going on in this administration. And that, to me, is, I think, how we're going to learn a lot about this.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So, Yamiche Alcindor, you have inspired us, you've educated us, you've challenged us, and I hope you sense the love. I hope you sense the support and the encouragement for all that you do.
I feel like I'm going to be energized through this impeachment inquiry thinking about tonight.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.